परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शब्द श्री श्रीमान divine grace is Bhakti Vedanta Swami Acharya Prabhupada ki jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnava ki jai. All glories to the Assembly. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Ram, Guru and Guru and Grantaraj. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is. Chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge, text number 2. I'll just read the Sanskrit and the translation and the purport, and then I'll speak something, and then in the end maybe there's one or two questions, and we stop around 4:30. Evam parampara praptam imang rajarashayo vidu Sakalene Mahata Jogunashta Parantapa. Translation goes like this. This is Krishna speaking to his warrior disciple Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield just before a fight is about to ensue. But before there was some philosophical discussion about the soul. So this is one of the verses spoken by the Lord. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of the cyclic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Srila Prabhupada has written the following purport to this verse. It is clearly stated that the Gita was especially meant for the saintly kings, because they were to execute its purpose in ruling over the seasons. Certainly Bhagavad Gita was never meant for the demoniac persons who would dissipate its value for no one's benefit and would devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims. As soon as the original purpose was scattered by the motives of the unscrupulous commentators, there arose the need to re-establish the disciplic succession. 5,000 years ago it was detected by the Lord himself that the disciplic succession was broken, and therefore he declared that the purpose of the Gita appeared to be lost. In the same way, at the present moment also, there are so many editions of the Gita, especially in English, but almost all of them are not according to the authorized disciplic succession. There are innumerable interpretations rendered by different mundane scholars, but almost all of them do not accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, although they make a good business of the words of Sri Krishna. This spirit is demonic because demons do not believe in God but simply enjoy the property of the Supreme. And since there is a great need of an edition of the Gita in English, as it is received by the Parampara, the cyclic succession system, an attempt is made herewith to fulfill this great want. Bhagavad Gita, accepted as it is a great boon to humanity, but if it is accepted as a treatise of philosophical speculations, it is simply a waste of time. The verse again. Ivam parampara praptam imam rajarashayo vidu sakale nihamhata yogo nashta parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of the cyclic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. So this verse is very important. Chapter 4 is called Transcendental Knowledge. And in the previous verse, in the first chapter, Krishna said that he instructed the signs to the sun god, the signs of yoga, the sun god Vivasvan, and Vivasvan gave it to Manu, who gave it to his son Ikshvaku, and so on and so forth. So since time immemorial, the knowledge of the Gita, or the knowledge of the Vedic or proper way of living for the human being has been given down since time immemorial through this disciplic succession, which of course starts with Krishna. Where is this disciplic succession? Yes. Anyway, it's here somewhere in the introduction. Yeah, in the end of the introduction is the disciplic succession. But so the disciplic succession started actually long ago, even long before Krishna was on this planet 5,000 years ago. Then the disciplic succession was revived because it had been lost. In the transcendental world, or in the transcendental realm, or for those who want to advance transcendentally, the knowledge that we want is the knowledge that comes down from God Himself. It is of course a fashion since, I guess, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, to rely on knowledge perceived through the senses. The church could not give at that time proper knowledge about transcendence, so there was this enlightenment consent. There was an idea of enlightenment, that we would kick out the old knowledge and find out with our senses what is actually the world is about. And we're living in that post-enlightenment era where we glorify the pursuit of knowledge through empirical experiment and speculation, in that you make a theory, okay, I think this is true, and then you make an experiment to see if you can prove it right or wrong. So this is the way that modern society has tried to gain knowledge lately, for the past many hundreds of years. And the problem with that process, the ascending process, where we try to reach up to higher knowledge, is that we are dealing here as human beings, as spirit souls caught in a body. If we want to get knowledge through the body, through our senses, we are dealing with a body which is made of the stuff that we are caught in, matter. So with the body made of matter and instruments such as microscopes, telescopes, or what have you, they're all made of the same stuff that the body is made of. So we can never get anything beyond matter by studying or trying to gain knowledge with our senses. Somebody had an idea, yes, I think the human being has evolved from lower species such as apes. Somebody had that idea. His name was Darwin. There was also, I think, Russell Wallace, I think, had the same idea. But that's so that idea became like in vogue with the idea of the 1800s, industrial development, the train and the dampmaskine, what is it called? Steam engine was developed, and there was this big enthusiasm about development. So Mr. Darwin and his theory about the evolution from apes seemed to fit very nicely into that. And even to this day, even it's a non-proven theory, it's a complete nonsense theory, they believe in it because they think that they want to believe in that theory, and they make some experiment to verify, and they think, yes, there are overwhelming evidence for the theory of evolution. But then somebody else comes and says, no, we find evidence that it's not true, such as Sariputta and Dhruta. They found evidence that you can actually disprove the theory of evolution from the point of view of fossils also. And from the point of view of mathematics and science, you can definitely disprove it. So the problem is that proving or disproving theories based on speculation and based on information through the senses can only bring us to as far as the senses can reach. Even if you speculate something that is right, you cannot know if it's right, because who's going to confirm it? There's no authority to confirm it other than your senses. So the Vedic way of gaining knowledge is completely different. It's completely different. The idea is that knowledge is already there. In pure spiritual knowledge, consciousness, awareness about everything is already there, in the sense that everything emanates not from some impersonal Big Bang idea, but everything emanates from the Supreme Person. Now, the idea that the scientists have today that everything comes from nothing, or from a chunk that exploded, or from a point, or from a singularity that somehow or other expanded. No, God knows, only God knows how that happened. But that's also another nonsense theory. I don't understand why so many people take that for granted. It's completely weird. How can something evolve that doesn't contain the qualities of what's evolving? Like the human being has so many intricate qualities, so many sophisticated functions and intelligence. How can something that doesn't contain these qualities evolve into something that does, if the qualities are not there in the source? It's not possible. So the Vedic logic is that everything emanates from something that already has everything that is in the emanation. So since the material energy must be an emanation from something, being impermanent, being temporary, that what it emanates from has to be non-material. And if it's non-material, it's up for grabs. You cannot say what it is. If it's non-material, you cannot say it has to be this and that. No, non-material is you don't know. So we have this world with consciousness, with beings that function according to laws, and to say that these laws and these function, that this complexity has arisen from non-complexity with no guidance, is a complete logical fallacy and an unscientific lie, which can be disproven even by science itself. The second law of thermodynamics disproves both the Big Bang and the theory of Darwin. But that's another story. We are not so interested in proof, either material proof or disproof for anything. We are interested in gaining the knowledge that comes down from the original source of knowledge, who is full of knowledge, who is God Himself. So the Vedic idea is that everything emanates from a supremely conscious person. Otherwise, how can conscious persons with intelligence, with motive, with purpose and willpower exist if that is not there to a supreme and unlimited extent in the source? So we see beauty, we hail beauty, we worship beauty. Why is that? Why do we appreciate beauty? Where is the standard of beauty coming from if it's not coming from an original, absolute, beautiful source? We like order, we like, quality, we like certain things. So where this standard of beauty, quality, fineness, where does it come from if it doesn't exist in an absolute source? So that's absolute source of beauty, knowledge, and everything that exists, and every good quality and every superior quality and everything else exists in the person of the Godhead, of the Lord. It has to. Everything has to emanate from something that contains everything that it emanates. So that means God is everything we see and more. So since we are emanations from God and now are trapped within material bodies and are ignorant about our own origin and are apparently unable through our material senses to understand the source from where we're coming, which by logic has to be non-material. That means we have to understand how to invoke that supreme source to deliver knowledge to us. So that means in order to understand the world, we have to surrender to God. That's the only way. We have to surrender to that supreme person. And the Krishna consciousness movement was started by a person who came in a disciplic succession, Srila Prabhupada, that emanates originally from God himself. So God is a person. He can walk, he can talk. He's not just love, he's not just an energy, he's not just everything, he's not just the universe. No, he's also a person. He can walk and talk, and he has opinions. So this we can only know if somebody who already knows God tells us these things. And by applying the instructions that somebody who knows God gives us, we can also know God. If we apply those instructions given by somebody who knows God properly, then we can also know God. So if the idea is that the knowledge is coming down about how the world is, what we are, and how to act, is coming down from the Lord himself, then it is a question of finding the right proper source of knowledge and just opening up our ears and listen. That is the logical conclusion of our little reasoning here. That if we cannot understand the world through empirical knowledge, then we have to find somebody who already is in contact with that supreme source. So that is the original Vedic culture, that the Lord gave knowledge of the science of Bhakti Yoga, the science of how to live, the science of spirit. He gave to the sun god, who is basically, so then one might wonder, what do you mean the sun god? The sun, there's no really not the sun. It's a fiery planet with millions of degrees. How can anybody live there? No, but on the sun they have different bodies. Bodies that are fit to live in that atmosphere. And so that is the case with all other planets. Even if they go to the moon and don't see anything but dust, doesn't mean that the moon is vacant in the sense that they believe. The Vedic information is that all planets have life, but maybe not life on the frequency that we can perceive, but it is there, and you can go there by proper means, not by Apollo rockets. You might go to a ball of dust, but if you want to go to the real moon, you have to offer pinda to the forefathers, and so on. There are processes for doing that. If you want to go to the moon, if you worship the forefathers, you go to the moon. If you worship the demigods, you will go to the planets of the demigods. If you worship ghosts and spirits, you will end up as a ghost. And if you worship Krishna, you will come to Krishna. But to worship Krishna and to actually do what we want to do and what we are offering in this Krishna consciousness movement, which is how to, when we quit this material body, return to God. We are spirit souls living in this material body, and at the end of our lives, where do we go? The soul is eternal part of God, so at the end of our lives, where do we go? What will be our next life? We can decide. By living in a certain way, if we live like cats and dogs, we will end up as cats and dogs. But if we actually want to go back to Krishna, we have to get rid of our material contamination. We have to get rid of our desire to enjoy through our senses in this body. The reason why we are not seeing God at the present moment is because we are absorbed in the external world, the world that is perceived by senses, and we identify very much with what we can see with our eyes and ears and so on and so forth, and we attach ourselves to that. We attach ourselves to the body that gives us the pleasure through the senses and so on and so forth. But in order to actually realize God, it is necessary to give up that taste and that desire for sense pleasure and replace it with a taste of transcendence. It is not possible to taste God consciousness and the bliss and the joy of God consciousness unless one is freed from the lower taste. One may get a quick, "Ooh, oh, that was far out in the temple, so much bliss." But because there is this attachment in the heart to the lower taste, where again our consciousness becomes attracted to these material things. So, by hearing the knowledge given by the pure devotee, somebody like Srila Prabhupada, who has by his studies and his perfection reached the platform of Krishna consciousness. So by hearing the words from the pure devotee, coming down through the disciplic succession from Krishna down through the spiritual masters, we can also understand how to get ourselves free from this attraction to material pleasures. If it were not for our attachment to the material pleasures in life, Krishna consciousness would be very easy. You just give up everything and become Krishna conscious. Give up all your speculative knowledge, give up sense gratification, give up and just live simply. But because we have this addiction to the senses, we have not only addictions to alcohol and coffee and cigarettes and whatnot, but we are addicted to the senses themselves. We are addicted to the feeling of pleasure we get through the senses. And especially the conditioned soul in the material world is especially addicted to the pleasures of sex. It's the greatest pleasure in the material world. But so it becomes like an addiction, like a drug addiction. And you have to get free of that addiction, because unless you get free of the addiction, you have to get the drug again and again and again and again, in the form of sense gratification. So, in the Krishna consciousness movement, we're offering an opportunity to replace that lower taste with a higher taste. And that is done by giving up the lower taste consciously, trying to give it up. There are 4 regulative principles that we recommend, such as don't eat meat or take drugs or stuff like that. Try to live simply and pure. And in that way we try to consciously give up the lower taste, but we also actively perform devotional service in the form of hearing and repeating the words given by Krishna and the Guru Parampara, such as the Bhagavad Gita. Hearing the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's instruction, this is called transcendental knowledge. And that transcendental knowledge will purify the heart to such an extent that one would eventually feel disgusted by the taste of material sense gratification, because the taste of Krishna consciousness is higher. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina raso vardya raso pyasya paramdrishta nivartate. Something like that. That we all have a taste for sense gratification, and if you give that taste up, you can only do so for a certain time, because after a while, anando mayavya, the soul wants some kind of enjoyment, and the enjoyment has to come from somewhere. So since the taste is still for the sensual world, we will go back to the sensual things. Eat, drink, like that, sensual things. But we have to then be intelligent enough to act in such a way as to establish a higher taste within our heart, a higher form of pleasure, by first of all trying to give up the lower pleasure and replacing it with a higher, just like a drug addict. Gradually he's trying to give up his drug and replacing it with some more sensible things to do. And sometimes he can't do it and replaces it with alcohol or something like that. It doesn't really work. So we have to make sure that we replace the lower taste with something actually Krishna conscious. And that is, and in this regard, we very much recommend the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Together with doing some active devotional service, such as coming to the temple, hearing the classes, cleaning the floor, selling books, and also studying and hearing these books. Now, in order to understand and to fill our heart with the transcendental knowledge which is naturally in the heart, it is already there, but it's also here in these books. So by reading these books, they harmonize with that natural knowledge in the heart. So when you read these books, even though there's nothing about sense gratification here, in the beginning one becomes a little bit disappointed because there's nothing about, there's nothing in the lower modes of nature of passion and ignorance, it's only transcendence. But after a while, one will feel that this text is, it gives bliss. It's like the same thing when you chant the Hare Krishna mantra, there is this bliss, this strange spiritual happiness, which is like something one has never experienced before, a very deep thing. The same thing when you study this transcendental knowledge, you feel the same kind of profound inner happiness. And there's no explanation of why that is, other than that this is different kind of knowledge than what you find in a book in the universe or whatever, or even different than what you find in another edition of the Bhagavad Gita. There are many, as Prabhupada says in the purport, many editions of the Bhagavad Gita, especially in English. I don't know how many there are in Danish. Not that many, I think. In the intro he says there's around 350 in English, and this was back in the 60s. But even if you read another edition of the Gita which is not translated by somebody who came in that disciplic succession, you will not make any sense of the Bhagavad Gita. I remember we read the Bhagavad Gita at school back in the 70s. I didn't understand anything about it. You know, I thought it was so boring. Yeah, the Bible, the Gita, whatever, I don't care. You know, that was so. But not until I read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, then all of a sudden there was a completely different book. It just made sense, you know, it was not some archaic thing that written by some Hindu poet or whatever. No, it was very, very alive. So, the Krishna consciousness movement is very, very unique, and we should never take it for granted. And we should all study the Bhagavad Gita as much as possible. Read one chapter every day, Srila Prabhupada said in the Bhagavad Gita. By reading these books, the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam and so forth, by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, we will gradually become eligible to perform pure devotional service. And when we quit this body, when we are old, or whenever we quit, it can happen at any time, we will return to Krishna, or at least, if we are not completely pure, because we started a process of spiritual development, at least we will get a human body in the next life. We are very, very lucky to have human bodies. In the Vedas it is said that there are 8,400,000 different species of life, and we have been through them all. The soul is not just a human soul. The soul can exist in animal bodies, plant bodies, and we have existed in them all. But now we are in a human form. And out of the 8,400,000 species,